Greetings, Earthlings! I'm Malakai. Welcome to the Genesis Key. In this video, I'm going to be discussing Noah's Ark. At no time in an apologist's career does it become more apparent that skeptics do not read the Bible they are criticising than when discussing the Ark and the Flood. Many of the questions skeptics ask about the Ark can be so easily answered just by reading the Bible. In this video, I'm not going to address every objection I've ever heard about the Ark. I'd just like to answer 3 commonly asked questions about the Ark, all of which are linked together. So it's kind of appropriate to answer them all here, really. The first question I'd like to answer is how a primitive man could have built such an Ark. The second is how he could have built such a big boat when no wooden ship has ever reached that size without major leaking problems. The last question is how did Noah fit every animal in the world on the boat? Okay, first question, how did primitive Noah build such an ark? The main problem with this question is that it indirectly begs the question. People asking it automatically assume the flood account to be false because they believe evolution already. According to evolution, all humans were once primitive, and not as intelligent as we are today. In actual fact, Noah was not primitive. In Genesis 4:21-22, we read that Noah's own brothers were skilled in crafting musical instruments and bronze and iron technologies. Is it unthinkable that Noah, a man whom God chose to build the ark, would have the skills necessary to build that ark, especially given that God practically told him how? In fact, the dimensions of the ark itself shows that Noah was far from primitive. In Genesis 6:15, we read that the ark dimensions were 300 cubits long and 50 cubits wide. This means the ark was 6 times as long as it was wide. Modern ship engineers will tell you that this is the best design for a ship. It is very difficult to tip over and would have no trouble braving even the greatest of storms. Other archaeological discoveries, such as the Antikythera mechanism, show that man never was particularly primitive. Manufactured between 100 to 150 BC, this kind of orrery would never be seen or even recorded again for 1,000 years. How many more technologies that we thought originated in the Middle Ages, or maybe even in the modern day, might have existed thousands of years ago and just been lost and reinvented? So the simple answer is Noah wasn't primitive. A simple reading of the Bible tells us that, and further research into archaeology confirms it. The next question linking to this is how could Noah have made such a big boat when more modern ship makers could never have made a wooden boat so large? We've already shown that how modern they were makes no difference. But is it true that no wooden ship ever managed to reach that size? In fact, it is not true. Here are some ancient ships with numerous functions that existed throughout history. The Leontifera is a huge battleship that fought in a battle in the Aegean Sea around about 280 BC. It is described by a man named Usher as being admired by all for her large size and exquisite construction. In her were 100 oars per tier, so that on each side there were 800 rowers, which made 1,600 in all. On the upper deck or hatches there were 1,200 fighting men, who were under 2 special commanders. When the battle began, Ceraunus won and Antigonus was forced to flee with all his navy. In this fight, the ships from Heraclea performed the best, and among them the Leontifera did the best of all. Unfortunately, Usher doesn't tell us exactly how big the Leontifera actually was, but we can figure out how big it was, approximately, just by thinking about logistics. Firstly, the ship had to have enough room for 2,800 men. It would also have to have been at sea for quite a while, at least a few days either side of the battle. It is therefore logical to assume it would have to carry quite a bit of food and drinking water. enough to keep almost 3,000 men alive for a while. In order to be able to manoeuvre efficiently, the oarsmen on each tier would have to be at least 3 feet apart. Usher tells us that there were 8 tiers of 100 rowers, so that's 100 men at least 3 feet apart. Mathematically speaking, that boat would have to be much longer than 300 feet, at least 400 feet. It was a massive boat. Unlike the Leontifera, we are given a very detailed description of the dimensions of this warship, which was built around 205 BC. According to Athenaeus, it was about 420 feet long, 57 feet wide, and 72 feet high. That's almost as big as the Ark itself. Finally, there's Zheng He's personal treasure ship. This ship was nearly 427 feet long and 196 feet wide. It not only had to carry the whole crew, with provisions of course, but it also had to carry lots of treasure for the Emperor, sometimes including the odd giraffe. All these gigantic ships had to be seaworthy. I don't know about you, but I wouldn't like to be in a battleship that kept sinking. Not great for battle. So the claim that Noah's Ark was the only ship of its size in all of history is false, as is the claim that it's impossible to build a seaworthy ship that big out of wood. It's also worth noting that while the main material for building the Ark was wood, it doesn't necessarily say that wood was the only material that was used. And so, on to our final question. How did the Ark fit all the animals in the world in it? This is another question that shows skeptics don't actually read the Bible, at least not closely. When answering this question, we need to answer 2 main questions. 1, how many animals are needed to be on the Ark? And 2, how big was the Ark? Whenever I discuss this topic with people, I ask those 2 questions, and they always either get one or both wrong, or say that they don't know the answer to one or both. Firstly, how many animals did the Ark need to contain? This is the one that I most often receive a wrong answer to. Usually, people believe it is 2 of every single species of animal currently on the planet, and some also believe every single species that has gone extinct as well. I can't remember too much from Sunday school, but what I can remember is the little toy ark that we used to play with. One animal I specifically remember is a little Dalmatian. Since I first recover that memory, I have theorised that Sunday school may sometimes be the reason people hold this false view, as well as other false views about the Ark and other areas of the Bible. The relevant passages we need to look at to determine which animals Noah needed to bring on the Ark are Genesis 6:19-20 and Genesis 7:2-3. Genesis 6:19-20 says, "And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, and of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive." I apologise for the stutter. I've had to re-record this particular section several times over. Genesis 7:2-3 says, "Take with you 7 pairs of all clean animals, the male and his mate, and a pair of the animals that are not clean, the male and his mate, and 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens also, male and female, to keep their offspring alive on the face of all the earth." In the original Hebrew, the word for beast and cattle in this passage is behemah, which refers to land vertebrate animal in general. The word for creeping things is rems, which has a number of different meanings in Scripture, but in this passage it most likely refers to reptiles. Obviously Noah didn't need to take sea creatures on board, because they would not necessarily be threatened with extinction by the flood. Obviously some creatures were destroyed, as is proven by the fossil record. However, preserving those creatures was none of Noah's business, it was God's. It is debated whether or not Noah needed to take insects, but if he didn't, they could have survived on floating logs, natural rafts, and vegetation mats. Excuse me. The Bible only specifies that everything on the earth that breathed through its nostrils died. 1 moment, please. There we go. That everything on the earth that breathed through its nostrils died. So, since insects and related animals don't breathe through their nostrils, it is biblically conceivable that they were not included on the ark. Genesis 7:2-3 specifies 7 pairs of clean animals. There is much debate about whether the Hebrew means 7 or 7 pairs of each kind of clean animal. By presupposition, I have always taken the position of only 7, but we'll say 7 pairs for the purposes of this video. The law which defines which animals are clean can be found in Leviticus 11 and Deuteronomy 14. This law was only codified in Moses' time, but since Moses was also the author of Genesis, and since God's people seem to have done and believed similar things before Moses, we'll assume that clean means the same thing here as it does in the rest of the Bible. Going by that assumption, there are actually very few clean animals, enough to summarise in just 2 biblical chapters. So, in summary, my apologies. So, in summary, the ark needed to hold 2 of every kind of unclean animal that breathed through its nostrils, and 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal that breathed through its nostrils. So, now we have the question of what is a kind. This is why I mentioned a little Dalmatian earlier on in this video. Contrary to popular belief, creationists such as myself do not believe that God created every single species of animal alive today exactly as it is, with absolutely no chance of any change whatsoever. We actually do believe in natural selection. In fact, creationist Edward Blythe wrote on natural selection long before Darwin. That being the case, we do believe that certain animals, like the Dalmatian, are descended from the same animal via natural selection. That being the case, kind is actually best defined as genus, a grouping of organisms having common characteristics distinct from those of other such groupings. This definition is consistent with the scriptures. In his book Noah's Ark: A Feasibility Study, John Woodmarap, I'm fairly certain I've said his name right, but I'm not 100% positive. John Woodmarap totals the number of genera needed to be about 8,000, so a little over 16,000 animals needed to be on the ark. This includes those generally believed to be extinct. It should be taken into account that John Woodmarap actually attempts to be generous to the skeptic by allowing greatly exaggerated numbers of dinosaur genera. So we'll go with the estimated total of 16,000 animals in total needed to be on the ark. I apologise for that. I wasn't there, and the Bible doesn't tell me this, so I don't know how true this figure is, but we'll stick with that. Earlier on in this video, I gave the size of the ark as being about 300 cubits long and 50 cubits wide. It was also about 30 cubits high and had 3 decks. In modern feet, that would be about 459 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 44 feet high. Its total volume would have been about 1.54 million cubic feet. That's the equivalent volume of 422 standard American railroad stock cars, each of which can hold 240 sheep. If we imagine the cages were on average 4,800 cubic inches, obviously some would be bigger, some would be smaller, the required 16,000 animals would take up only about 42,000 cubic feet, which is only just over 14.5 equivalent stock cars. That would leave 507 equivalent stock cars. If we assume that Noah did have to take insects, that wouldn't make much difference. If each pair was kept in 4-inch squared cages, that'd only be an extra 12 equivalent stock cars, which gives Noah plenty of space for him and his family, all the necessary food and equipment, and possibly some space to let some of the animals out for exercise every so often. Adding to that, it would be more than possible for birds and other flying creatures to live on the rafters, thus not even taking up any floor space. In total, the most Noah would have needed, barring the possibility of stacking cages on top of each other, would be about half of the Ark's total volume. So, in conclusion, the Ark was not built by primitive man. There never was a primitive man. Noah and his family were perfectly capable of building such an Ark. There have been wooden ships almost as large which were built in history, and logistically there was more than enough space to hold all the animals. Skeptics must be advised that while I do not dogmatically say that all these things are true, the Bible does not exclude any of these things that I have said in this video. Remember also that if man can think of it, God has thought of it. God told Noah exactly how to build the ark, and in Genesis 6:20 we read that actually God himself brought the required animals to Noah, meaning it was him who chose the animals to preserve. Logistically, the ark was perfectly suited to carrying its precious cargo. Thank you for watching. God bless.